In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that has governed galactic politics for millennia. Humans are the universe's greatest mistake. Too weak for the crushing gravity worlds, too slow for the speed-borne races, too short-lived to master the ancient arts. They are nothing more than cosmic accidents stumbling through the void. The Galactic Confederation Academy stands as the pinnacle of interstellar education, where the brightest minds from 1,000 worlds gather to shape the future. For 3 centuries, no human has ever graduated from its advanced programs. They simply lack what it takes. But sometimes the universe enjoys proving itself wrong. When Marcus Chun stepped off the transport ship onto Kepler Station, clutching his acceptance letter with trembling fingers, he had no idea he was about to shatter every assumption the galaxy held about his species. To his classmates, he was just another fragile human trying to play in a league far beyond his evolutionary limits. They were about to learn why humans call their homeworld Earth instead of paradise, and why, in the ancient human language of Latin, the word terra didn't just mean ground. It meant something worth fighting for, something worth dying for, something that would make even the mightiest predators think twice before taking another step. The galaxy was about to meet its first human Deathworlder. It would never be the same again. The transport bay of Kepler Station hummed with the nervous energy of 1,000 species beginning their academic journey. Marcus Chun adjusted his worn backpack straps and tried not to gawk at the towering Vorthan students whose crystalline exoskeletons caught the artificial light like living prisms. To his left, a group of Scythian scholars floated past, their tentacled forms moving with a grace that made him feel clumsy just watching. "Human," a voice called out, sharp and dismissive. Marcus turned to see a creche approaching, its 6 legs carrying its armored bulk with predatory precision. "You're lost, yes?" The civilian sectors are 3 levels down. Marcus pulled out his acceptance tablet, the holographic display showing the unmistakable seal of the Galactic Confederation Academy's Advanced Strategic Studies program. "Actually, I'm here for orientation." The creche's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of laughter. "Impossible. Humans do not possess the cognitive capacity for advanced programs. This must be an error." Around them, conversations died as other students turned to watch. A red Hani with scales that shifted from blue to purple slithered closer, its voice a melodic hiss. "Perhaps it is the custodial program? Humans are adequate at simple tasks." Heat rose in Marcus's cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. "Strategic studies, combat analysis, and xenobiology specialization." The gathering crowd erupted in sounds that ranged from chittering laughter to subsonic rumbles of amusement. A Zinthari, its 4 arms gracefully gesturing, spoke in perfectly modulated tones. "My dear primitive, combat analysis requires understanding of physics beyond your species' comprehension. Your people still use chemical propulsion for space travel. And xenobiology?" The creche clicked again. "You cannot even coexist peacefully with your own species. How would you study others?" Marcus felt the familiar weight of expectations pressing down on him. This wasn't new. He'd faced the same dismissal at the preliminary testing centers, the same condescending explanations of why humans weren't ready for advanced education. What these beings didn't understand was that humans had spent their entire existence being underestimated. "I appreciate the concern," Marcus said, shouldering his pack. "But I think I'll stick with my actual assignment." He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the continued commentary. As he walked toward the academy transport, he caught fragments of conversation in a dozen languages, all centered on the amusing notion of a human attempting higher education. The academy transport was a marvel of engineering, its gravitational stabilizers ensuring comfort for species with wildly different physiological needs. Marcus found himself seated between a quiet Darren whose rocky exterior made them look like a mobile boulder, and a Zelanian whose bioluminescent patches pulsed in complex patterns. "You are the human in strategic studies," the Darren rumbled, their voice like shifting stone. I am Keth Moore. I study geological engineering. Marcus Chun. Nice to meet you. The Zelanian's lights flickered rapidly. I'm Zlix, temporal mathematics major. I must confess curiosity about your presence here. Our database indicates humans have never succeeded in advanced programs. Marcus had fielded this question dozens of times during the application process. Maybe it's time someone tried harder. Trying harder will not alter fundamental limitations. Zlix's lights shifted to what Marcus suspected was skepticism. Humans process information at roughly 0.3% the speed of an average Zelanian. Your memory retention is similarly constrained. Our reaction time to physical threats is measured in full seconds rather than microseconds, Kethmore added, though their tone seemed less dismissive than factual. And your physical durability is among the lowest recorded in the galaxy. Marcus watched the stars while past the transport's viewport. You know what's funny about statistics? They only tell you what's been measured, not what's possible. The Galactic Confederation Academy sprawled across the surface of Kepler Station like a metallic city. Towers dedicated to different disciplines reached toward the stars, connected by bridges that accommodated everything from species that required methane atmospheres to those who existed as pure energy. The central spire, housing the Advanced Strategic Studies program, stretched higher than all the rest. During orientation, Marcus learned he was one of 12,000 students beginning their studies this cycle. He was also the only human in any advanced program. The welcoming ceremony took place in a vast amphitheater where Dean Vextar, an ancient Vorthan whose crystalline form had taken on the deep blue of centuries-old wisdom, addressed the gathering. You represent the finest minds of 673 species. The Dean's voice resonated through translation matrices into every language present. Here, you will push the boundaries of knowledge, challenge the limits of understanding, and prepare for the conflicts that shape our galaxy's future. Marcus noticed how the Dean's prismatic eyes seemed to pause on him for just a moment longer than the others. There was no hostility there, just what might have been curiosity. The first week of classes proved everything his critics had predicted. Quantum strategic analysis required processing calculations at speeds that left Marcus dizzy. His classmates completed complex probability matrices while he was still parsing the initial variables. In xenobiology, Professor Yinthao rattled off anatomical specifications for predatory species at a pace that made Marcus's head spin. The Crithani hunting packs of Sigma Draconis employ distributed consciousness algorithms to coordinate attacks across 12-dimensional battlefields, she explained to the class. Their neural processing operates at frequencies that would liquefy most carbon-based brains. Student Shun, please calculate the optimal defensive formation against a pack of 47 individuals. Marcus stared at the holographic display showing the writhing, tentacled nightmares that were Crithani hunters. Around him, his classmates were already working through the problem, their various forms of mathematics creating a symphony of achievement. The Zinthri to his left had 17 probability trees running simultaneously. The Vorthan behind him was calculating vectors through crystalline matrices that hurt to look at. I need more time, Marcus admitted. Time is a luxury that death does not provide, Professor Yinthal said coolly. Student Zark demonstrate the solution. The creche student Marcus had encountered on arrival clicked confidently. Standard dispersal pattern Gamma 7, modified for the Crithani's 11-dimensional attack vectors. Establish overlapping fields of fire at 40-degree intervals, accounting for their phase shift capabilities. Simple. Correct. Note, class, how student Zark identified the key variables within 3.7 seconds. This is the processing speed required for survival against apex predators. Marcus slumped in his seat as the lesson continued. By the end of the week, he was averaging 30% on his practical exams, while his classmates routinely scored above 90%. His advisors suggested he transfer to a more appropriate program. There is no shame in recognizing one's limitations, Counselor Rethick assured him, her Scythian form floating gently as they spoke. Humans have many fine qualities. Your artistic endeavors are quite pleasant, and your emotional range provides interesting perspectives for psychological studies. I didn't come here to be interesting, Marcus said. I came here to learn. Learning requires capacity, young human. Perhaps the basic strategic studies program would better suit your needs. That night, alone in his quarters, Marcus stared at the transfer documents. Around him, the station hummed with activity as his classmates continued their studies, their superior minds effortlessly processing information he could barely comprehend. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just proving what everyone already knew about human limitations. He thought about home, about the blue skies and endless oceans of Earth, about the stories his grandfather had told him of ancient human conflicts, where victory went not to the fastest or strongest, but to those who simply refused to quit, about why humans had spread across their solar system, not because they were the best at anything, but because they were too stubborn to know when something was impossible. Marcus tore up the transfer documents. The next morning brought combat simulation class, taught by Commander Thexlar, a scarred Vorthan who had survived the border wars with the Hive Collective. The classroom was actually a massive holographic arena where students faced simulated combat scenarios. Today we study pack hunter dynamics, Commander Thexlar announced. You will face a pride of Nexari shadow cats in their natural environment. Nexari are among the galaxy's most efficient killers, capable of phasing through solid matter and coordinating attacks through quantum entanglement. The simulation activated, placing the class in a twilight forest where the shadows seemed to move with predatory intent. Marcus's classmates immediately began implementing their standard tactical responses, their enhanced minds calculating optimal positions and attack patterns. Marcus found himself assigned to protect the left flank with Zlix, the Zelanian from the transport. Around them, the forest erupted into chaos as shadow cats phased through trees and rocks, their forms barely visible except for the gleaming teeth and claws that were very, very real. Standard formation Epsilon, Zlix called out, their bioluminescent patches flashing in complex patterns. I will establish a temporal displacement field while you provide covering fire. But as Zlix began their calculations, a shadow cat phased directly through a massive tree trunk, materializing 3 feet behind the Zelanian with fangs extended. Marcus didn't calculate angles or probabilities. He dove. The impact sent him and the shadow cat tumbling across the forest floor. Pain exploded through his shoulder as claws raked across his flesh, but Marcus held on, wrapping his arms around the creature's neck. It was like trying to wrestle liquid darkness, but humans have been wrestling things that wanted to kill them since long before they knew there were other species in the universe. What are you doing? Zlix's lights flickered in panic. Release it. Use proper tactical positioning. Marcus didn't respond. The shadow cat writhed in his grip, trying to phase away, but something was preventing it. Maybe it was the sheer illogic of a prey species attacking instead of running. Maybe it was the fact that Marcus wasn't trying to kill it efficiently. He was just refusing to let go. The creature's struggles became more frantic. Around them, the simulation continued as other students implemented their carefully calculated strategies. But here, in this small patch of artificial forest, something primal was happening. The Shadow Cat's quantum entangled pack began converging on Marcus's position, drawn by distress signals from their trapped member. You are compromising the entire exercise. Zark's voice came over the comm system. Disengage and implement proper defensive protocols. Marcus felt the weight of multiple Shadow Cats approaching. His classmates' strategies relied on maintaining distance, using superior technology and calculation to stay ahead of the creature's predatory instincts. But Marcus had grown up hearing stories of humans who faced saber-toothed tigers with nothing but sharpened sticks, who stared down charging mammoths, and somehow lived to pass on their genes. As the first reinforcement Shadow Cat materialized nearby, Marcus did something no tactical manual in the galaxy recommended. He roared. It wasn't a calculated psychological warfare tactic. It wasn't designed to interfere with any specific sensory apparatus. It was just a human being, cornered and angry, making the sound his ancestors had made when facing impossible odds. The sound that had echoed across Earth's plains when early humans drove off creatures 10 times their size through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to be prey. The shadow cats froze. For a moment that stretched across quantum probability fields and temporal displacement calculations, every predator in the simulation paused. Something in that sound spoke to instincts older than civilization, older than space travel, older than the careful mathematics that govern modern warfare. In that pause, Zliks completed their temporal field. The other students rallied their defensive formations. The exercise concluded successfully with minimal casualties and optimal resource expenditure. But in the debriefing afterwards, nobody talked about the temporal fields or the quantum calculations. They talked about the human who had grabbed a shadow cat with his bare hands and held on while it tried to phase away. They talked about a sound that had somehow made apex predators hesitate. Commander Thexlar's crystalline features were unreadable as she reviewed the simulation data. Student Chun. Yes, ma'am. Your tactical performance was abysmal. Your reaction time was inadequate. Your situational awareness was compromised by emotional responses. Marcus's shoulders sagged. Yes, ma'am. However, the commander continued, you demonstrated something that cannot be taught or calculated. When faced with certain death, you attacked. When outnumbered and outmatched, you made your enemies hesitate. These are rare qualities in the galaxy. She paused, studying the simulation replay where Marcus clung to the shadow cat like death itself. Tell me, Student Chun, what was your species' primary survival strategy during your evolutionary development? Marcus thought about Earth's history, about ice ages and volcanic eruptions, about asteroids and climate changes that should have wiped out early humans a dozen times over. Persistence hunting. We weren't fast enough to catch most prey or strong enough to kill it quickly. So we just kept following it for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Commander Thexlar's form shifted to a lighter shade of blue. Your people are pursuit predators. That explains much. Around the classroom, Marcus could feel his classmates' attention sharpening. The creche clicked thoughtfully. The Zinthari's 4 arms gestured in what might have been respect. Most species in the galaxy evolved as either prey or ambush predators, the commander continued. Prey species develop superior speed, stealth, or defensive capabilities. Ambush predators become stronger, faster, more efficient killers. But pursuit predators develop something different. They develop the ability to continue when continuation seems impossible. Marcus felt something shifting in the way his classmates looked at him. The casual dismissal was fading, replaced by a wariness that hadn't been there before. Your homework for next session, Commander Thexlar announced, is to research persistence hunting in your own species' evolutionary history. All of you. I want to understand how different approaches to survival shaped different tactical mindsets. As students filed out of the classroom, Marcus found himself walking alongside Keth Moore, the Darren who had spoken to him on the transport. Your species hunted by exhaustion, Keth Moore rumbled thoughtfully. My people evolved on a high-gravity world where everything was a threat. We became very good at hiding in plain sight, becoming indistinguishable from the environment. Survival strategies, Marcus mused. Yes, but I begin to think there is something unsettling about a species that survives by refusing to stop. When faced with a human who will not quit, what does one do? Marcus didn't have an answer for that. But as they walked through the corridors of the academy, past displays showcasing the achievements of 1,000 civilizations, he began to understand that maybe the question itself was more important than any answer. That evening, his grades were still terrible. His processing speed was still a fraction of his classmates. His reaction times were still measured in clumsy seconds rather than precise milliseconds. But for the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus felt like he belonged there. After all, Humans had never been the best at anything. They'd just been the best at not giving up. And in a galaxy full of efficient predators and highly evolved prey species, sometimes that was enough to change everything. 3 months into the academic term, Marcus had achieved something unprecedented in Galactic Confederation Academy history. He was failing spectacularly, while somehow becoming the most discussed student on Kepler Station. The incident in advanced tactical analysis had started simply enough. Professor HFY, a Thylosian whose spider-like form allowed her to manipulate 12 holographic displays simultaneously, had presented the class with the Battle of Zirion Prime, a classic study in military disaster. The Terran Colonial Defense Force faced a Kresh invasion fleet numbering 47,000 vessels, she explained, her multiple arms weaving complex patterns as tactical displays materialized throughout the classroom. The human fleet numbered fewer than 3,000. Standard mathematical models indicate the humans should have surrendered immediately to minimize casualties. Marcus watched the historical recreation unfold, seeing the familiar blue and white hulls of human ships arrayed against the sleek predatory forms of the Kresh fleet. His classmates were already running calculations, their enhanced minds processing the tactical situation with characteristic efficiency. Instead, Professor HFY continued. The humans chose to engage. The battle lasted 43 hours and resulted in complete human victory, despite impossible odds. Your assignment is to identify the critical mathematical errors in Kresh strategic planning. Zark, the Kresh student who had consistently demonstrated superior tactical analysis, clicked confidently. Simple computational failure. The Kresh fleet commander underestimated human weapons technology by a factor of 2.3. Additionally, human shield harmonics operated outside expected parameters. A Zenthri student gestured elegantly. Human faster-than-light communication systems created coordination advantages not reflected in the initial tactical matrix. Marcus studied the battle replay, watching human ships move in patterns that seemed almost random to his classmates' mathematical minds. But there was something familiar about those movements, something that reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about ancient Earth battles. Student Chun, Professor HFY's compound eyes fixed on him. Your analysis? Marcus hesitated. His classmates had covered the obvious technological factors, but they were missing something fundamental. I don't think it was mathematical errors. The classroom fell silent. Zark's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned with suppressed amusement. Explain, Professor HFY commande. The humans weren't fighting to win, Marcus said slowly, working through the idea as he spoke. They were fighting to make the Kresh decide winning wasn't worth it. The Thylosians' multiple arms paused their constant motion. Clarify. Marcus pointed to the tactical display. Look at the human ship movements. They're not trying to achieve tactical superiority. They're making every kill as expensive as possible. Every time the Kresh destroy a human ship, 3 or 4 Kresh vessels are damaged or destroyed. Basic attrition warfare. Zlix's bioluminescent patches flickered dismissively, mathematically unsustainable for the smaller force. Unless, Marcus continued, the smaller force doesn't care about sustainability. The humans aren't calculating how to win. They're calculating how to make the Kresh lose more than they're willing to lose. Professor HFY's eyes seemed to sharpen. Continue. Every species in the galaxy fights to minimize their own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. It's logical. It's efficient. But humans? Marcus watched a squadron of human fighters ram themselves into a Kresh dreadnought rather than retreat. Humans fight like they're already dead. Like the only thing that matters is how much damage they can do before they go down. The classroom had become completely quiet. Even the ambient hum of the station's life support seemed muted. After 18 hours of this, the Kresh fleet began making mistakes. Not calculation errors, psychological ones. They started hesitating before engaging human formations. They began pulling back damaged ships instead of using them until they were completely destroyed. They started fighting like they wanted to survive. Marcus met Professor HFY's compound gaze. The moment a superior force starts caring more about preservation than victory, they've already lost. Professor HFY studied the tactical display for a long moment, her multiple arms moving through what Marcus had learned were complex mathematical verifications. Finally, she spoke. Student Chun has identified the core strategic principle that human forces have employed in 73% of their military victories, she announced. Psychological exhaustion of numerically superior forces through unsustainable aggression ratios. Zart's clicking had stopped entirely. This is irrational. Rationality is a luxury for species that have alternatives. Marcus found himself saying, humans developed on a planet that tried to kill them every day for millions of years. We learned that sometimes the only winning move is to make sure your enemy knows that killing you will cost them more than you're worth. The implications rippled through the classroom like a quantum cascade. Marcus could see his classmates recalculating their assumptions about human psychology, about the mathematics of warfare, about what it meant to be a pursuit predator in a galaxy full of ambush hunters and prey species. After class, Kethmore approached Marcus in the corridor. The Darren's rocky exterior seemed more agitated than usual, small stone fragments flaking away as they moved. Your analysis troubles me, Kethmore rumbled. Why? My people's survival strategy involves becoming indistinguishable from the environment until threats pass. We endure by not being noticed. But humans? The geological engineer paused. Humans endure by making themselves impossible to ignore. Marcus had never thought of it that way, but as they walked past displays showcasing various species' achievements, he began to see the pattern. Every other civilization in the galaxy had succeeded by becoming very good at something specific. The Vorthen were master mathematicians. The Zinthri were technological perfectionists. The Kresh were apex predators. Humans were just very difficult to kill. That evening, Marcus received a message that changed everything. It was from Admiral Tethys, head of the Galactic Confederation Defense Council, and a legend among military strategists. The message was simple. Report to Strategic Planning Center Alpha tomorrow at 0800 hours. Marcus had never been to the planning center, which occupied an entire section of Kepler Station and was restricted to military personnel and advanced graduate students. When he arrived the next morning, he found himself in a conference room with 12 beings who represented the finest strategic minds in the galaxy. Admiral Tethys was a Vorthen whose crystalline form had taken on the deep black of ancient wisdom and countless battles. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. Student Chun, your analysis of the Zirian Prime engagement has been reviewed by the Defense Council. Your insights into human psychological warfare have identified a gap in our strategic planning that we were not aware existed. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. Another human weakness in a room full of beings who had long ago evolved past such inefficiencies. I'm not sure I understand, Admiral. We are facing a crisis, Admiral Tethys continued. 3 weeks ago, long-range scouts detected a fleet approaching from beyond the galactic rim. The vessels are unlike anything in our databases, and preliminary analysis suggests they belong to a species we have never encountered. The holographic display activated, showing sensor readings from the edge of known space. The ships were massive, angular things that seemed to bend space around themselves in ways that hurt to look at. We designate them the Devourers, based on what we have observed of their behavior. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They arrive at inhabited systems, strip them of all biological matter, and move on. 7 civilizations have gone silent in the past month. Commander Thexlar, whom Marcus hadn't noticed enter the room, took up the briefing. Our tactical analysts have run every combat scenario in our databases. The Devourer fleet numbers in excess of 100,000 vessels, each one larger than our largest dreadnoughts. Their technology operates on principles we do not understand. The mathematical reality hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about the Battle of Zirian Prime, where 3,000 human ships had somehow defeated 47,000 crush vessels. Those odds had seemed impossible. This was worse. Every tactical model predicts the same outcome, Admiral Tethys said quietly. Total galactic conquest within 6 months. Complete elimination of all known civilizations within 2 years. Marcus stared at the display, watching the inexorable progress of the Devourer fleet. Why are you telling me this? Because, Commander Thexlar said, you are the only being in this academy who has demonstrated an understanding of how an inferior force can defeat a superior one through psychological rather than mathematical warfare. The Defense Council has authorized the formation of an emergency strategic planning committee, Admiral Tethys continued. Your assignment is to develop tactical recommendations for a galactic defense that has no hope of military victory. The enormity of what they were asking hit Marcus like an asteroid impact. You want me to figure out how to fight something that can't be beaten? Yes, Admiral Tethys said simply. Because that appears to be what humans do. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself working alongside some of the most brilliant strategic minds in the galaxy. The planning center became his second home, filled with holographic displays showing the Devourer advance and increasingly desperate tactical analyses. The other members of the planning committee treated him with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. They could process information faster, calculate probabilities more accurately, and design weapon systems beyond his comprehension. But none of them seemed capable of thinking like a species that had learned to survive by refusing to die. The Devourer vessels employ quantum phase armor that renders conventional weapons 43% less effective, reported strategist Vexlin, a Zinthri whose 4 arms never stopped moving as she manipulated tactical displays. Additionally, their faster-than-light capabilities operate on principles that violate 3 fundamental laws of physics. Their resource consumption patterns suggest they view biological matter as fuel rather than life, added analyst Korthke, a Thylosian whose spider-like form allowed him to monitor 17 different data streams simultaneously. Negotiation appears impossible. Marcus studied the data until his eyes burned. The Devourers were everything the galaxy's nightmares were made of, utterly alien, technologically superior, and completely indifferent to the existence of other life forms. They consumed worlds the way humans might eat fruit, casually, efficiently, and without any consideration for what they were destroying. What if we evacuate, suggested Counselor Rithel during one late-night planning session. Relocate core populations to hidden systems beyond their advance route. Impossible, commandé Dexla replied. 7 billion Vorthan alone would require transport capacity that does not exist. And hiding assumes they cannot track us, which our intelligence suggests they can. Marcus watched the tactical displays update with new reports of Devourer activities. Another system had gone silent. Another civilization had simply ceased to exist. They're not fighting a war, he said suddenly. The room fell silent. Explain, Admiral Tethys commanded. Marcus stood up, pacing to the main display. Wars happen between beings who want something from each other. Territory, resources, ideology. But the Devourers don't want anything from us. They just want us gone. This is what we have already established, strategist Vexlin said impatiently. How does this insight help us? Because, Marcus said, feeling pieces of strategy beginning to form in his mind. If they're not fighting a war, then we can't beat them by winning battles. We have to make them understand that consuming our galaxy will cost them more than it's worth. Analyst Kortheke's multiple eyes focused on Marcus. How do you make a cost-benefit analysis meaningful to beings who demonstrate no concern for casualties? Marcus thought about Earth's history, about every time his species had faced extinction and somehow found a way to survive. About ice ages and volcanic eruptions, about plagues and asteroids, about predators that should have wiped out early humans before they learned to use tools. You make them understand, he said slowly, that some prey isn't worth hunting. He turned to face the assembled strategists, seeing in their alien features the same mix of fear and desperate hope that had probably been on human faces for millions of years. We can't beat them in open combat, but we can make every world they want so expensive to take that they decide to find easier prey elsewhere. Admiral Tethys leaned forward. Continue. The galaxy has spent centuries perfecting the art of efficient warfare. Minimal casualties, maximum effectiveness, clean victories. But humans never learned to fight efficiently. We learned to fight like cornered animals. Marcus activated a new tactical display, showing the galactic map with Devourer advance routes overlaid in threatening red. Every world they approach gets evacuated, not to hiding places but to defensive positions. Every planet becomes a fortress. Every moon becomes a weapons platform. Every asteroid belt becomes a minefield. We don't try to save infrastructure or resources. We just try to make sure that taking any system costs them exponentially more than it's worth. This strategy requires every civilization to accept massive losses, Counselor Rithel pointed out. Yes, Marcus said. It requires everyone to fight like humans. The implications hung in the air like a quantum field. What Marcus was proposing went against every instinct these species had developed over millions of years of evolution. He was asking prey species to stop running. He was asking predators to stop calculating odds. He was asking everyone to fight like persistence hunters who had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to make your enemy regret starting the fight. Commander Thexlar's crystalline form had shifted to a deep amber color that Marcus had learned indicated intense thought. This strategy assumes the Devourers are capable of cost-benefit analysis. Everything biological is capable of cost-benefit analysis, Marcus replied. Even if they don't think like us, they still have to operate under physical laws. Energy expenditure, resource consumption, time investment, these things matter to any species that wants to survive long enough to expand across galaxies. Admiral Tethys studied the tactical projections for a long moment. You are proposing that we transform every civilization in the galaxy into Deathworlders. Marcus nodded. For as long as it takes to make them go away. And if we cannot make them go away? Marcus met her ancient gaze with the steadiness that had carried his species through millions of years of impossible odds. Then, we make them remember that they tried to eat the wrong galaxy. The meeting ended with no decisions made, but Marcus could see the idea taking root in the minds around him. Over the following days, word of the strategy began to spread through the planning center, then to military command structures throughout the Confederation. The response was exactly what Marcus expected, a mixture of horror and fascination from species who had never contemplated the mathematics of mutual destruction. But as reports continued to arrive of devourer advances, of civilizations going silent, and worlds being stripped of all life, even the most logical minds in the galaxy began to understand that logic might not be enough to save them. Sometimes survival required something more primal than efficiency. Sometimes survival required learning to think like the persistence hunters from a small blue world called Earth. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the command center of Fortress Kepler, watching the most desperate battle in galactic history unfold across three-dimensional tactical displays. The Devourer fleet had finally reached the core systems, and everything he had proposed was being put to the ultimate test. The transformation had been staggering to witness. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had spent millennia perfecting the art of efficient, logical warfare had embraced a strategy that was fundamentally irrational. The Vorthan had turned their crystal cities into massive gravity bombs. The Zenthari had retrofitted their elegant ships into ram missiles guided by artificial intelligence programmed with one directive: make the enemy pay. Even the prey species had evolved overnight. The timid Redhani had developed biological weapons that turned their own bodies into living mines. The peaceful Darren had learned to destabilize planetary cores, turning entire worlds into weapons of last resort. Devourer Formation Delta 7 is engaging the Proxima Defense Perimeter, reported Tactical Coordinator Zlix, whose bioluminescent patterns have been modified to process battle data at superhuman speeds. Initial contact in 17 minutes. Marcus watched the display, seeing familiar patterns in the chaos. The Devourer ships moved with the same inexorable efficiency they had demonstrated in system after system. But now they were facing something none of their previous victims had offered: organized, systematic, mathematically insane resistance. Proxima defenders are implementing Protocol Omega, announced strategist Vexlan. All civilian populations have been evacuated to defensive positions. Planetary infrastructure is being sacrificed for maximum tactical advantage. Protocol Omega was Marcus's term for what humans called scorched earth, the complete willingness to destroy everything rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Watching it implemented on a galactic scale was both terrifying and beautiful. The Devourers approached Proxima Prime, expecting another easy harvest. Instead, they found a planet that had been turned into a massive trap. The elegant cities were gone, replaced by fortress complexes built from the rubble. The orbital habitats had been converted into weapons platforms. Even the planet's 3 moons had been hollowed out and filled with antimatter charges. Contact, Zlix announced. The battle began with mathematical precision. Devourer vessels opened fire with weapons that operated outside known physics, tearing through space itself to strike their targets. The defenders responded not with equivalent force, but with something far more disturbing: complete disregard for their own survival. Marcus watched Vorthan crystal ships ram themselves into Devourer hulls, their crews singing mathematical death songs as they died. He saw Zenthri fighter pilots guide their craft into enemy weapons arrays, manually overriding safety systems to maximize damage. Thylosian commanders ordered their vessels to self-destruct in perfect geometric patterns, creating chain reactions that rippled through Devourer formations. Enemy force reduction, 12%, reported analyst Kortha K. Allied force reduction, 67%. In any normal battle, those numbers would represent catastrophic defeat. Here, they represented something unprecedented. The Devourers were taking casualties at a rate they had never experienced. Phase 2, Marcus ordered. Across the Proxima system, the moon bombs detonated. 3 artificial supernovas bloomed in space, their radiation washing over both fleets indiscriminately. The Devourer's quantum phase armor protected them from the worst effects, but they were taking damage, real, measurable damage from beings who had chosen to irradiate their own system rather than let it be consumed. More importantly, Marcus could see something in the Devourer formations that hadn't been there before: hesitation. They're pulling back damaged vessels, he observed. Look at formation Echo 9. 3 ships took critical hits, and they're being withdrawn instead of used until complete destruction. Commander Thexlar's crystalline form had shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before: deep purple streaked with silver. They are beginning to calculate preservation versus consumption ratios. Exactly, Marcus said. They're starting to fight like they want to survive. The battle for Proxima lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the system was a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. The Devourers had won. Technically, they controlled the system and were beginning their consumption process. But they had lost over 30% of their fleet, and the biological matter they were harvesting was contaminated with radiation and biological weapons that made it barely worth the effort. Enemy fleet advance has slowed by 37%, Zlix reported. Devourer formations are implementing new screening protocols before system entry. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Devourers were learning caution, exactly what he had hoped for. Send the signal, he ordered. Begin Phase 3 operations. Phase 3 was the part of the strategy that had horrified even Marcus when he first conceived it. If the Devourers could learn caution, then the galaxy would teach them fear. Across 17 systems along the Devourer advance route, automated beacons activated. Each beacon broadcast the same message in mathematical languages that any spacefaring civilization would understand. Warning: this system has been designated a total loss zone. All biological matter has been infected with self-replicating molecular disassemblers. Consumption will result in fleet-wide contamination. Approach at your own risk. It was a lie, of course. The galaxy didn't possess molecular disassemblers, and the science required to create self-replicating ones was beyond current technology. But the Devourers didn't know that. All they knew was that the prey they had been hunting for months was now claiming to have poisoned itself rather than be eaten. The psychological impact was immediate. Devourer formations began approaching marked systems with extreme caution, sending probe ships ahead of their main fleets. When the probes detected normal biological matter, the main fleets would advance, only to find that every world had been turned into another fortress, another trap, another mathematically insane death maze designed by species who had collectively decided that extinction was preferable to consumption. "It's working," Admiral Tathys observed during a strategy meeting 3 weeks later. Devourer advance rates have decreased by 62%. They are expending significant resources on reconnaissance that was previously unnecessary. Marcus studied the strategic display, watching the red markers of Devourer fleets creep slowly through space that they had previously crossed at maximum speed. "They're learning to be afraid of us. The question," Commander Thexlar said, "is whether fear will be enough to make them abandon their expansion entirely." Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The strategy was working. The Devourers were taking losses, slowing their advance, becoming cautious about systems they would previously have consumed without thought. But they were still advancing, still consuming worlds, still representing an existential threat to galactic civilization. The answer came from an unexpected source. Kethmore, the daring geological engineering student who had become Marcus's closest friend at the Academy, appeared in the command center carrying a data tablet that flickered with readings Marcus didn't recognize. "Marcus," Kethmore rumbled, their rocky exterior showing signs of extreme agitation. "I have been analyzing the quantum signatures from Devourer fleet movements, and they are not from this galaxy." The command center fell silent. Admiral Tathys turned her ancient attention to the young geologist. "Explain." Kethmore activated a holographic display showing quantum resonance patterns. Devourer ship hulls carry trace signatures from different physical laws. They originate from a galaxy where fundamental constants operate differently. Their technology works here, but inefficiently. Marcus felt something clicking into place in his mind. They're not expanding into our galaxy. They're fleeing from something in theirs. That would explain their consumption patterns, Analyst Corthe K observed. Not conquest or colonization, but resource gathering for continued flight. Commander Thexlar's color shifted to deep amber. Refugees. Alien refugees consuming everything in their path because they cannot afford to slow down. The strategic implications hit Marcus like a quantum cascade. Everything they had assumed about the Devourers was wrong. They weren't conquerors or apex predators. They were prey, running from something so terrible that they were willing to strip entire galaxies bare to fuel their escape. "That changes everything," Admiral Tathys said quietly. Marcus was already working through the ramifications. If they're refugees, then they have somewhere they're trying to get to. And if they're in full flight, then stopping to fight us is exactly what they can't afford to do. He turned to face the assembled command staff, feeling the weight of revelation reshaping his understanding of the entire conflict. "We've been approaching this wrong. We don't need to defeat them militarily. We just need to make them understand that going through us is going to cost them more time and resources than going around us. The galaxy is directly in their path to the galactic rim," strategist Vexlin pointed out. "Circumnavigation would add thousands of years to their journey. Then we negotiate," Marcus said. "We offer them something they need more than our biological matter, a way through that doesn't involve consuming everything in their path." The concept of negotiating with the Devourers had been dismissed early in the conflict due to their apparent inability to communicate. But Marcus was beginning to understand that their silence might not indicate an inability to communicate, but rather a desperate focus on survival that left no room for anything except consumption and flight. First contact protocols. Admiral Tethys ordered. Prepare a delegation. Ma'am, Marcus said, I'd like to volunteer for the delegation. Every being in the command center turned to stare at him. Admiral Tethys' crystalline features seemed to sharpen. Student Shun, you are not qualified for first contact operations. No, Marcus agreed. But I understand something about running from predators. And I understand what it's like to be so focused on survival that you can't see any other options. Commander Thexlar's color shifted to something Marcus had learned indicated concern. Elaborate. Marcus thought about Earth's history, about the long chase across ice ages and climate disasters that had shaped human psychology, about what it meant to be persistence hunters who had sometimes been the prey. Humans spent millions of years being chased by things that wanted to eat us. We learned that when you're running for your life, you don't stop to consider the impact of your survival on other species. You just run, and you consume whatever resources you need to keep running. He gestured to the tactical display, showing Devourer fleet movements. But humans also learned something else. Sometimes the thing chasing you can be reasoned with. Sometimes what looks like predation is just another species trying to survive. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to stop running and start talking, you can find solutions that don't require anyone to die. Admiral Tethys studied him for a long moment. You propose approaching beings who have consumed 7 civilizations and asking them to negotiate. I propose approaching refugees who have been running so long they forgot there might be other options. The first contact mission launched 3 days later. Marcus found himself aboard a small diplomatic vessel approaching the leading edge of the Devourer fleet, accompanied by a translation matrix that could theoretically communicate in any mathematical language, and a diplomatic protocol that had never been tested under circumstances where failure meant galactic extinction. The Devourer ships were even more massive up close, their angular hulls bending space in ways that made Marcus's eyes water. As the diplomatic vessel approached, weapon systems that operated outside known physics tracked their movement with casual lethality. Broadcasting first contact protocols announced the ship's AI. Mathematical friendship indicators, resource-sharing proposals, and survival cooperation algorithms. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Information flooded their communications array. Not the simple response they had expected, but massive data streams containing star charts, resource calculations, and something that looked like astronomical coordinates for locations outside the galaxy. They're talking, Marcus breathed. The translation matrices worked frantically to process the incoming data. Slowly, patterns emerged. The Devourers weren't just responding, they were explaining. The data told a story of cosmic horror that made the current crisis seem manageable by comparison. The Devourer's home galaxy was being consumed by something that existed outside conventional space-time, something that turned matter into patterns of pure entropy. They had been fleeing for millions of years, consuming resources from galaxy after galaxy in a desperate attempt to stay ahead of the expanding zone of absolute destruction. They call it the hunger, the translation matrix reported. A self-expanding field of quantum dissolution that converts organized matter into unstructured probability. Their entire civilization exists to flee from its advance. Marcus studied the astronomical data, seeing the terrible mathematics of the Devourer situation. They needed to reach the far edge of the galactic cluster before the hunger expanded into this region of space. Any delay, any detour, any pause in their resource gathering would mean extinction not just for them, but potentially for every galaxy in the local group. But there was something else in the data, something that changed everything. They're offering an exchange, Marcus realized. Technology transfer in return for assisted passage. The proposal was staggering in its implications. The Devourers possessed technology that could move entire solar systems, could accelerate biological evolution, could create artificial galaxies. They were willing to share this knowledge in exchange for a negotiated passage through the galaxy that didn't require consuming every inhabited world. They want to pass through quickly and quietly, Marcus explained to the command staff during an emergency briefing. They'll evacuate populations ahead of their advance, strip uninhabited systems for resources, and leave infrastructure intact on all inhabited worlds. In exchange, they'll provide technology that will advance galactic civilization by millions of years. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Civilizations that had spent months preparing for mutual destruction were suddenly discussing the largest technology transfer in known history. The risk is enormous, Admiral Tathes pointed out. We are trusting the survival of everything we know to beings who have already demonstrated their willingness to consume entire civilizations. The opportunity is equally enormous, countered strategist Vexlan. Access to transgalactic technology, artificial evolution capabilities, and stellar engineering on scales we cannot imagine. Marcus found himself in the strange position of arguing for peace with beings his strategy had been designed to fight. They're not evil, he said during one late-night strategy session. They're just desperate. And desperate beings make terrible decisions when they think they have no alternatives. Keth Moore, who had become something of an expert on Devourer technology, rumbled agreement. Their quantum signatures indicate they have been in continuous flight for over 40 million years. Desperation of that duration would drive any species to extremes. The final decision came from an unexpected source. A message arrived from Earth, the first communication Marcus had received from home since arriving at the Academy. It was from his grandfather, somehow transmitted through channels Marcus didn't know his family had access to. Heard about your situation through military contacts. The message read, Sounds familiar. Your great-great-grandmother faced something similar in the Pacific Theater. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust your enemy when they say they just want to go home. Marcus realized that his grandfather was talking about World War II, about decisions made by people who understood that sometimes survival required taking enormous risks on the possibility that your enemies might be telling the truth about their motivations. The treaty negotiations took place in neutral space, aboard a construct built jointly by Devourer and Confederation technology. The final agreement was unlike anything in galactic law. A corridor through inhabited space in exchange for technology that would transform every aspect of civilization. The Devourers would evacuate threatened populations to temporary shelters, strip resources only from uninhabited systems, and complete their passage within 1 standard year. In exchange, they would provide gravitational engineering, biological acceleration technology, and faster-than-light communication systems that operated outside conventional physics. Most importantly, they would share their knowledge of the hunger, helping galactic civilizations prepare for the eventual expansion of entropy from their home galaxy. It is the most dangerous gamble in galactic history, Admiral Tathes observed as the treaty was signed. It's also the most human thing the galaxy has ever done, Marcus replied. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same observation deck where he had first seen Kepler Station, watching the last of the Devourer fleet disappear into the space between galaxies. Behind them, they left transformed worlds, new technologies, and civilizations that had learned something important about the difference between enemies and refugees. The human who had arrived as a failing student was now Dr. Marcus Chun, the youngest being ever to be awarded the Galactic Strategic Studies doctorate. His thesis, Survival Strategies for Persistence Predators in an Ambush-Prey Galaxy, had become required reading at military academies across known space. But, more importantly, he had taught the galaxy something about itself. That sometimes the bravest response to an impossible situation wasn't to fight or flee, but to stop and ask whether there might be a third option that no one had considered. As he walked through the corridors of the academy, past students from 100 worlds who now studied human military doctrine alongside traditional strategic analysis, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy still saw humans as primitives from a backward world, but now they also saw them as the species that had saved everyone by being too stubborn to accept that salvation was impossible. Commander Thexlar found him in the observation lounge, her crystalline form reflecting the light of distant stars. "Dr. Chun," she said, "I have been curious about something since the conflict ended." "What's that?" "When you first proposed the strategy of mutual destruction, did you believe it would lead to negotiations?" Marcus considered the question, watching ships from a dozen species moving through space that had recently been a battlefield. "No," he admitted. "I thought we were all going to die. I just wanted to make sure that if we did die, it would be on our own terms." Commander Thexlar's color shifted to something warm and amused. "And that determination to die well is what led to everyone living well." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe we just got lucky that the things trying to kill us turn out to be refugees instead of predators." "Perhaps. But luck favors those who prepare for impossible odds." Marcus smiled, thinking about his grandfather's stories, about persistence hunters who had learned to survive by being too stubborn to know when to quit. "In that case," he said, "humans have been preparing for impossible odds for a very long time." Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in patterns that now included new constellations. Artificial systems created by Devourer technology and populated by species that had learned to think like Deathworlders. The galaxy was becoming something new, something that combined the mathematical precision of ancient civilizations with the stubborn, illogical courage of a species that had never learned to accept the inevitable. It was, Marcus thought, exactly the kind of galaxy that humans could thrive in. After all, they had always been at their best when the odds were impossible and everyone expected them to fail. Some things, it seemed, never changed.